Warning: this video will have spoilers for Godzilla Minus One. So, as of the making of this video, Godzilla Minus One's theatrical run has been extended. Again. And it's breaking so many records and nominations to the point where I can barely catch up. Initially, when the movie was announced back in November of last year, with later information that the movie was going to be a period piece that was another reimagining or remake of the first movie, I was wary about it, mainly since the last Japanese Godzilla movie was also a reimagining of the original. It wasn't until I learned that Takashi Yamazaki was not only directing, but writing and VFX supervising. Takashi Yamazaki, who also directed the live-action Parasite movies, the Stand By Me Doraemon movies, and the Always Sunset on Dirt Street movies. The opening of Always Sunset on Dirt Street 2 may seem familiar to Godzilla fans who were on the internet 14 years ago. My expectations were moderate, since I felt that it was too early for another new take on Godzilla. But after watching Godzilla Minus One at an early screening in IMAX, I can say without a doubt that Godzilla Minus One is the best reimagining of the original movie out of every past attempt. And after two more watches with friends who in both screenings were crying,
I'm crying.
I can also say that this is the best Godzilla movie since the original, the definitive modern version of the monster. It got me thinking, what made this new take on Godzilla in a post-Godzilla 2014 world the best out of all of them? Looking back, the novelty of a new Godzilla movie in my lifetime really blinded anything that could have gone wrong. Then again, literally two of the only things that constantly preoccupied my mind at that time was the 2012 San Diego Comic-Con trailer and what Godzilla was going to look like in the first American take on the monster since 1998. With that aside, Godzilla 2014 is a heavily flawed movie, but still holds a special place in my heart. After my last rewatch, I can definitely understand a lot of the criticisms at the time, like how Ford Brody's character felt lacking in comparison to Joe Brody. Yet, most of the movie spent on Ford, and the infamous screen time Godzilla had in the movie, which was the spark of many debates. I feel like the story would have been stronger if Joe was the one who had to rescue Alien Sam instead of Ford. Imagine how stronger the narrative would have been if Ford tragically died during the male Muto's hatching, and Joe, who's an everyman to the situation but with the knowledge of how these monsters communicate, has to be the one that rescues what's left of his family. That definitely would have been a subversion to the militant perspective of the story, while also going for a more Spielberg take on the characters that Gareth Edwards was trying to homage. As for the depiction of Godzilla in this movie and how he's utilized in the story, my biggest issue is how his origins aren't exactly the result of atomic testing. Instead, he was just awakened from radiation and serves to stop other monsters from threatening the world. In this case, the Mutos from repopulating, which feels more like Gamera from Gamera Guardian of the Universe than, well, Godzilla. Which goes into my next criticism, that this was basically a versus movie that was originally marketed as a solo Godzilla movie. The trailers made it out to be that he was going to be this big major threat to humanity, and instead he was essentially the one stopping the big threats. I would have been more comfortable with this if Godzilla wasn't portrayed as the movie's savior that people cheered for by the end, considering that he did as much collateral damage as the Mutos throughout the movie, and it wasn't until Monarch Legacy of Monsters that acknowledged the direct casualties of Godzilla. This would be like if Godzilla was shown to be a hero by the end of Godzilla 2000. Yeah, he stopped a threat that could have taken over the world, but that doesn't mean Godzilla has resolved any of the destruction he's caused. However, we never get the sense of nuclear destruction shown that harkens back to the themes of the original movie, just the possibility of it with the nuclear bomb that's meant to lure the Mutos. But one of the best scenes in the whole movie is when Shirazawa shows Admiral Stance his father's pocket watch that stopped during the bombing of Hiroshima as a means of talking him out of the use of a nuclear warhead, only for their next scene together to be as if that conversation didn't mean anything. I feel that the MonsterVerse's take on Godzilla as a whole, including the trailer for Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire, rushed to portray Godzilla as a hero, akin to Godzilla during the later Showa era movies, which isn't a bad thing since it's a take that can gear towards younger fans or those who prefer Godzilla as a hero that battles evil. Plus, this isn't too much of a problem since after this movie came out, came the start of what's now known as the Reiwa era, Shin Godzilla. Now, if you thought Kid Me was excited that there was going to be a new Godzilla movie from Legendary Pictures and Warner Brothers, considering that a year prior, Pacific Rim came out, imagine teenage me when I learned that there was going to be a new Godzilla movie from Toho Studios from Shinji Higuchi, who just a year prior directed the live-action Attack on Titan movies, and Hideaki Anno, the mind behind Neon Genesis Evangelion. To say that I was obsessed with this movie's production is an understatement. I still remember the day when photos of the unused animatronic of Godzilla were leaked to the internet. At the time, there was nothing like this in terms of how drastically different Godzilla looked. Okay, maybe not if you count Godzilla 1998, but this design heavily resembled the original but way more grotesque. Jagged teeth, beady eyes, scarred skin, and a tail that's almost as big as his body. When Funimation got the rights to distribute this movie theatrically to the US, I was so ready to see it on the big screen. I even won a poster of Shin Godzilla from Funimation. The hype was real, and I gotta say, I came out of the theater beyond satisfied to be graced from such an experience. For the longest time, I did see Shin Godzilla as the best modern Godzilla movie. It went back to the themes of nuclear destruction from the original by doing the unthinkable and actually updating the atomic bomb parallels with a more recent nuclear disaster that was the result of government incompetence. Granted, it did alienate a lot of viewers who were unfamiliar with the Fukushima meltdown and how Japan's bureaucracy operates, which leads to the pacing of the movie feeling a bit dragged and drawn out, unless you understand the movie's political humor, like how Rando Yaguchi's political rank and name changes as more responsibility is thrown at him. Even though Rando Yaguchi is essentially the central protagonist of the movie, as the only one who took the possibility of what caused the leak in the bay to be a living creature seriously, and throughout the story brought the team together to stop Godzilla, the narrative is more about what bureaucracy and people as a whole can accomplish in the face of disaster when you take away all the political red tape. Not to mention, the movie's cinematography and shot compositions are heavily stylized to homage the works of Shinya Tsukamoto, who even plays a character in the movie, and of course, Neon Genesis Evangelion. On to Godzilla Minus One, and holy hell, this isn't just one of the best Godzilla movies, this is one of the best monster movies ever. The fact that the story follows an ex-kamikaze pilot that not only fled from his duty, but failed to stop Godzilla when he could have had the chance, which led to the deaths of many people, to then return to what's left of his hometown, disgraced, but to meet a woman with a baby who also lost their families to the war, and gradually become a surrogate family despite the trauma of Godzilla preventing him to be fully committed, only for Godzilla to reappear when he starts to accept his new life, makes this the most emotionally driven Godzilla movie, possibly more than the 1954 original, given how close and personal Shigishima's fear and hatred of Godzilla gets. Granted, the depiction of ex-soldiers gathering together is definitely romanticized, but the destruction of Ginza, on top of being denied aid from the US government because this was the start of the Cold War, It's effective towards the movie's themes of fighting a battle for a just cause. I'd also like to give the movie credit for being creative when it came to stopping Godzilla, given that the Japanese self-defense forces wasn't even founded yet, and resorting to something akin to the oxygen destroyer or a chemical weapon would have felt out of place given everything involved from the narrative at that point of the movie. So, it was great to see characters resort to different means to stop Godzilla, using leftover ships that aren't even armed, scientific theory, and an unused warplane. The Doc's monologue about civilians and ex-soldiers coming together while loading the boats, and his monologue of how little the Japanese government valued the lives of their own people during the war, gets the point across well. By that act of the movie, Shikishima was willing to die to avenge Noriko and for Akiko's future, while still being conflicted about orphaning her. Even though this movie could have only worked within the time period it takes place in, the story feels like what Godzilla 2014 should have been. Godzilla as a threat to humanity that's the result of atomic testing, and a cast of characters that are so engaging that you don't want to see him die. And I feel that this is what makes Godzilla Minus One a more intense yet digestible experience than Shin Godzilla for audiences, because more people can be put into the shoes of characters that are just trying to live during a terrifying situation, over characters that are mainly politicians. Getting into the soundtracks of each movie, Godzilla Minus One blows both Godzilla 2014 and Shin Godzilla's out of the water. Regarding Godzilla 2014, for a movie that doesn't have the classic Godzilla theme, Alexander Desplat did a great job at making a score that emphasizes the grand scale and the presence of the monsters, and the track Back to Janjira definitely gave the sense that the hidden existence of giant monsters is something to be afraid of. Shin Godzilla's soundtrack is still among my favorites. Persecution of the Masses and Who Will Know by Shiro Sagusu were worth getting the soundtrack on CD. But the reuse of past Akira Ifukube tracks from other movies, while was a pretty cool novelty at the time, feels like they were added for the sake of nostalgia more than anything. Just like how the sound design of Shin Godzilla uses roars, stomps, and explosions from the Showa era, it's more of an artistic direction from Hideaki Anno, which to diehard Godzilla fans might enjoy, but to casual viewers, this could take them out of immersion. Not to mention, the use of decisive battle and all its variations did get tiring by the last few times it played. If I can describe Naoki Sato's soundtrack for Godzilla Minus One in one word, it would be eerie, perfectly capturing the setting and what's happening in a scene, even with Divine and Resolution as the two original tracks that stand out the most. Tracks that play during scenes that build up to the plan to stop Godzilla can make simple moments emotionally daunting, like pain. And for the classic Godzilla themes, instead of just reusing a track from an older movie, the theme from Mothra vs. Godzilla and the original with aspects from King Kong vs. Godzilla's theme are fully reorchestrated and sound gorgeous. Discussing the depiction of the King of the Monsters, Gareth Edwards' original vision for Godzilla was what we perceive as the traditional Godzilla, but with added realism, as realistic as you can get with a 350-foot monster, such as visible gills and elephant-like feet. When you get down to it, the MonsterVerse's take on kaiju is that they're just huge animals instead of mutations that are the result of radiation. Godzilla's origins in Godzilla 2014 states that he was an ancient being that was already gigantic, and all atomic testing did was lure him back to the surface, and that there were other Godzillas at one point in time. Not to mention, if we're to go by the later installments, ancient civilizations worshipped him, and nuclear power is more like a power-up in a video game than something terrifying. This seems to be a version of Godzilla that has all the traits of what makes a traditional take on the character, but without the tragedy that created him. Shin Godzilla featured to this day the most unique interpretation of Godzilla. While not created from atomic bomb testing, Godzilla being the result of a prehistoric aquatic life feeding on unregulated dumped barrels of radioactive waste still gets the point across of mankind's recklessness and ignorance creating a monster. That same recklessness and ignorance that gave Godzilla's early stages the chance to evolve into a threat that could have taken over the whole world. Sure, Godzilla being a creature that evolved into multiple forms weirded out most viewers at first, but then Anno and Higuchi's take on the atomic breath and Godzilla's new laser-based powers was a spectacle to see. My only complaint with this take on Godzilla in his main fourth form throughout the movie is that he's more akin to a giant walking statue than an animal. Granted, that was done to show just how invulnerable he is towards the Japanese self-defense force. In Godzilla Minus One is the long-needed pinnacle of what Godzilla should be to modern audiences. While Shin Godzilla and the incarnations after in anime each gave Godzilla completely different origins and made him an entirely different monster in each take, ranging from being plant life that was the end result of natural selection on Earth to an extra-dimensional being that could endanger time, Godzilla Minus One went back to the basics with its own creative liberties. Just like in the original, Godzilla is a local legend in Odo Island. This time, we see him as a Godzillasaurus who is downright terrifying as he kills nearly everyone in the airbase, showing that he's an aggressive and territorial creature. After being caught in the nuclear weapons test at the Bikini Atoll, he's irradiated and changed into the monster we see throughout the movie. Design-wise, even though it's technically an updated look of the design from Godzilla the Ride that Takashi Yamazaki also wrote and directed, and to an extent the design of the Godzilla from the opening of Always Sunset in Dirt Street 2, his facial features and eyes are able to convey so much anger and primal instinct. And even though this Godzilla is back to being the height and scale of the original, his dorsal plates act as a countdown to what can be the most devastating depiction of his atomic breath, even more than how Shin Godzilla handled its atomic breath scene, simply because of the tension brought from the story and how tragic the aftermath is, showing as much atomic bombing imagery as the original movie and its consequences after. Version of Godzilla's creative changes does serve a purpose to the story, as his healing factor and the need to heal every time he uses atomic breath becomes the time slot to stop him. There's also characteristic nods here and there that fans of the franchise would notice upon close inspection, without distracting casual audiences. For example, Godzilla starting out as a Godzillasaurus, like in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, Godzilla becoming agitated from bright lights, like in the original, and I'm pretty sure the final shot of what's left of Godzilla regrowing is a homage to GMK. It's undeniably Godzilla. Now, I'm not here to discredit Godzilla 2014 and Shin Godzilla with how much Godzilla Minus One got right. All these movies are enjoyable for what they are and what they have to say. I just believe that Godzilla Minus One is the movie both fans and those who aren't too familiar with Godzilla can enjoy together, as the movie that managed to capture the tone of the original while having an engaging story that projects a myriad of powerful emotions, which seems to be a case with the movie's success. This isn't just a movie that I highly recommend because it's a Godzilla movie. This is a movie I can highly recommend for showing the indomitable human spirit among tragedy, and that is why I believe Godzilla Minus One is the perfect reimagining of Godzilla.